Elijah froze, his heart pounding, the mug of coffee trembling in his hand. The wind howled through the Blue Ridge Mountains, clawing at Elijah Harper's cedar cabin as dusk bled into a bruised violet sky. A sharp, plaintive cry pierced the twilight, not the familiar hoot of an owl or rustle of deer, but something raw, desperate. Was it a wounded animal? Or worse, a trapper's bait, luring predators to their doom? The cry came again, closer from the shadowed porch. Living alone in these wilds, he knew danger lurked. Bears, cougars, or men like Caleb Holt, the hunter who despised anything with claws. Steeling himself, Elijah reached for the door, the cry echoing in his bones. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Elijah Harper's fingers tightened around the door's cold iron handle, his breath shallow in the dim glow of the cabin's single lantern. At 47, he was no stranger to the wilderness's whispers, but this sound, half wail, half plea, unsettled him. The Blue Ridge Mountains, with their dense forests and rolling hills, held secrets that could turn a man's blood cold. 3 years ago, after losing his wife, Ruth, to a merciless illness, Elijah had fled the clamor of Asheville for this remote homestead, chasing her dream of a life woven into nature's tapestry. Now, as the wind rattled the windows, he wondered if that dream had led him to something perilous. He eased the door open, just a crack, peering into the gathering dark. The porch was a silhouette of shadows, the air heavy with the scent of damp leaves and pine. There, on the worn welcome mat, sat a creature no larger than a house cat, its spotted fur trembling against the chill. A bobcat cub, its blue-grey eyes wide with innocence, stared up at him. Elijah's breath caught. He'd photographed wolves and bears in his years as a wildlife photographer, but never had a wild creature come so close. The cub's star-shaped spot on its forehead gleamed faintly, and its tiny frame seemed frail, ribs pressing against its coat. Elijah's mind raced. Where was its mother? Bobcats were solitary, shy, avoiding humans at all costs. This cub's presence spelled trouble, hunger, injury, or worse, abandonment. He thought of Caleb Holt, the hunter whose truck had been seen prowling nearby, his traps a menace to the mountain's predators. Had this cub escaped one? Elijah's hand drifted to the locket at his neck, Ruth's keepsake, its etched wildflower a reminder of her belief in kindness, even when it was risky. "Every creature deserves a chance," she'd said, her voice echoing in his memory. Moving slowly, Elijah retreated to the kitchen, the cub's gaze following him through the crack in the door. He sliced a piece of trout from yesterday's catch, its silvery flesh glistening. Wildlife shouldn't rely on humans, he knew, but this cub's hunger was a silent plea he couldn't ignore. He opened the door wider, sliding the fish onto the mat. The cub flinched, ears twitching, but didn't flee. Its nose quivered, drawn to the scent. Elijah stepped back, closing the door to a sliver, and watched through the window as the cub pounced, devouring the offering with a ferocity that belied its size. He named it Sparrow, for its fragile, fleeting presence. Sparrow finished, licking its chops, and looked up at the door, its eyes holding what Elijah swore was gratitude. Then, with a flick of its stubby tail, it darted into the underbrush, swallowed by the night. Elijah stood rooted, his heart a tangle of wonder and unease. In all his years, no bobcat had dared approach his cabin. Was it a fluke, or a sign of something greater stirring in the wild? The wind died down, leaving an eerie stillness. Elijah sank into his armchair, the locket warm against his chest. Ruth would have loved this, he thought, her laughter ringing in his mind. She'd always believed the mountains held magic, moments of connection that healed broken souls. But Elijah wasn't so sure. Living alone had taught him caution. Nature was as cruel as it was beautiful. He glanced at the door, half expecting another cry, but only silence answered. A soft hum drifted from the path outside, breaking his reverie. Agnes Weaver, his nearest neighbour, appeared in the lantern's glow, her silver hair catching the light as she hummed a bluegrass tune. The retired librarian, with her warm smile and love for Boone's storytelling traditions, was a rare visitor. She paused, her eyes narrowing at the porch. "Saw a shadow scamper off," she said, her voice low. "Looked like a bobcat cub. You feeding strays now, Elijah?" Elijah hesitated, then recounted the encounter, his words halting. Agnes's brow furrowed. "Careful now. Caleb Holt's been prowling, setting traps. Hates anything that might threaten his land." "A cub like that? Could draw trouble?" Her warning hung heavy, stirring Elijah's unease. Caleb's name was a dark thread in Boone's gossip, a man hardened by loss, his farm ruined by debt. If he found Sparrow or its family, blood would spill. Agnes softened, sensing his turmoil. "Ruth would have called it a gift, that cub coming to you," she said, her hand brushing his arm. "But gifts in these mountains come with a price." She turned back to the path, her hum fading into the night. Elijah stared after her, the locket heavy against his heart. Sparrow's cry still echoed in his mind, a call he couldn't unhear. He rose, checking the door's lock, though he knew it wouldn't keep out the wild, or men like Caleb. Tomorrow, he'd watch for Sparrow, if it returned. The cub's bold glance had sparked something in him, a flicker of purpose amidst his grief. As he doused the lantern, the Blue Ridge stretched vast and unknowable beyond his window, its secrets waiting to unfold. The frost clung to the Blue Ridge Mountains like a whispered secret, painting Elijah Harper's homestead in delicate patterns as dawn broke over the rolling hills. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and the first light filtered through the mist, casting a silver glow across the clearing. Elijah stood at his cabin's window, coffee steaming in his hands, his eyes scanning the porch where Sparrow, the bobcat cub, had appeared the night before. The memory of its star-shaped spot and desperate hunger lingered, tugging at his heart. Ruth's locket, warm against his chest, seemed to pulse with her voice. "Every creature deserves a chance." But Agnes Weaver's warning about Caleb Holt, the hunter with a grudge against predators, gnawed at him. He'd barely slept, half expecting another cry in the night. As he sipped his coffee, a faint rustle broke the silence. His gaze snapped to the clearing, where shadows shifted in the underbrush. There, emerging from the frost-kissed ferns, was Sparrow, its tiny frame unmistakable. But it wasn't alone. A larger bobcat, muscular and regal, stepped forward, its spotted coat blending with the dawn's light. Her black-tipped ear tufts stood tall, and her amber eyes locked onto Elijah with a wary intensity. Behind her, 5 more cubs tumbled out, their playful energy a stark contrast to her vigilance. Elijah's breath caught. An entire family, here, at his doorstep. The mother's presence was commanding, her tail twitching as she assessed the cabin. Sparrow, bolder than its siblings, scampered closer, its star-shaped spot gleaming. Elijah's photographer's instinct kicked in, his fingers itching for his camera, but he forced himself still. Any sudden move could spook them. His mind raced with questions. Why had they come? Bobcats were solitary, elusive, their trust a rarity. The cubs, no older than a few months, were thin, their ribs faintly visible beneath their fur. Hunger, he realized, must have driven them here, the same desperation that had brought Sparrow alone. He thought of Caleb's traps, the rusted jaws Agnes had mentioned, and a chill ran through him. If this family was roaming so close to human dwellings, they were in danger. Moving with deliberate care, Elijah retrieved more trout from his kitchen, slicing it into small pieces. He opened the door just wide enough to scatter the fish across the clearing, then retreated, watching through the window. The mother bobcat, he named her Ember for the fire in her gaze, tensed, her ears flicking. She didn't approach, instead nudging her cubs forward. Sparrow led the charge, pouncing on a piece of fish with a clumsy ferocity that made Elijah's lips twitch. The other cubs followed, their playful tussles filling the clearing with soft growls and muffled mews. Ember stood apart, her posture alert, never taking her eyes off the cabin. Elijah's heart swelled, a mix of awe and trepidation. This was no ordinary morning. In his 5 years in the Blue Ridge, he'd captured countless moments, deer grazing in morning mist, owls gliding through twilight, but nothing like this. The cubs' innocence, their trust, felt like a gift, one Ruth would have cherished. But Agnes's words echoed, "Gifts in these mountains come with a price." He couldn't shake the image of Caleb's truck, its rumble a threat to this fragile scene. As the cubs ate, a familiar hum drifted up the path. Agnes Weaver appeared, her silver hair catching the dawn's light, a basket of apples in her arms. She froze at the sight of the Bobcat family, her eyes widening. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, setting the basket down slowly. "A whole litter, Elijah. You've got yourself a miracle." Her voice was warm, but her brow creased with worry. She stepped closer, keeping her distance from Ember, who watched her intently. "Caleb was at the feed store last night, bragging about his traps. Said he'd clean out anything threatening his land." "You need to be careful." Elijah's stomach tightened. "They're just hungry," he said, his voice low. "I can't let them starve." He gestured to the cubs, who were now wrestling over the last scraps of fish. Sparrow, the smallest, darted between its siblings, its boldness earning a soft chuff from Ember. Agnes nodded, but her expression was grim. Hunger makes 'em brave, but it also makes 'em targets. Caleb's not the only one who'd shoot first and ask questions later. She knelt, pulling an apple from her basket and rolling it toward the cubs. One, darker furred than the others, sniffed it curiously, batting it with a paw. Agnes chuckled, but her eyes met Elijah's. "You're walking a thin line feeding 'em. They're wild, not pets. Ruth would have understood that." Her words stung, but Elijah knew she was right. He'd studied bobcats in his work, solitary hunters, fiercely independent. Feeding them could bind them to his cabin, making them vulnerable to men like Caleb. Ember gathered her cubs with a low, throaty call, her tail flicking as they fell into line. Sparrow lingered, casting a glance at the cabin before scampering after its mother. The family melted into the underbrush, leaving the clearing empty save for the scattered fish bones. Elijah exhaled, his coffee long cold. Agnes rose, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I'm starting a petition at the community hall," she said, "to stop illegal trapping." "You should come. Show those photos you're always taking. Might sway some folks." Elijah hesitated. He'd kept to himself since moving here, avoiding Boone's gatherings. The thought of facing Caleb or others who shared his views made his chest tighten. But the image of Sparrow's star-shaped spot, so fragile yet defiant, stirred something in him. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Agnes gave him a knowing look, then turned back to the path, her hum fading into the mist. Alone again, Elijah retrieved his camera, reviewing the few shots he'd dared to take. The cubs' play, Ember's vigilance, they were moments of raw beauty, the kind Ruth had lived for. He set the camera down, his fingers brushing the locket. Feeding the bobcats was a risk, but so was doing nothing. Caleb's traps were out there, and winter was coming. He couldn't turn away, not now. As he stepped outside to clear the fish bones, a distant rumble caught his ear. Caleb's truck, or just the wind? The mountains held their secrets close, but Elijah knew one thing. Sparrow and its family were no ordinary visitors. Their trust, however fleeting, had changed something in him. He'd watch for them tomorrow, and maybe, just maybe, he'd find the courage to face Boone and Caleb for their sake. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the Blue Ridge's mist as Elijah Harper knelt by the stream that cut through his homestead. The water sang over smooth stones, its clarity a mirror for the golden leaves drifting from the trees. His camera hung around his neck, but his hands were busy scrubbing the trout bucket, the scent of fish lingering in the crisp air. Sparrow and its family had vanished into the forest at dawn, but their presence clung to him like the frost on his boots. Ember's amber eyes, sharp with caution, haunted him, as did Agnes Weaver's warning about Caleb Holt's traps. Ruth's locket, tucked beneath his flannel, felt heavier today, a reminder of the line he was crossing by feeding the bobcats. He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, and scanned the clearing. The cabin stood sturdy, its cedar walls weathered but warm, a testament to the life he'd built after Ruth's death. 5 years ago, he'd left Asheville's bustle for this solitude, chasing her dream of a wilderness home. Now, that dream had brought him Sparrow, a cub whose hunger had pierced his isolation. But with it came danger. Not just Caleb's traps, but the risk of taming something meant to be wild. He'd read about bobcats in his photographer's journals, solitary, elusive, their survival tied to instinct, not human kindness. A soft splash drew his attention to the stream. He crept forward, his boots silent on the mossy bank, and peered through the reeds. There, in a shallow pool, stood Ember, her muscular frame poised as she swiped at the water. A fish flashed silver, and her paw struck with lightning precision, flipping it onto the bank. The cubs, hidden in the ferns, erupted in a chorus of mews, tumbling over each other to reach the prize. Sparrow led the charge, its star-shaped spot unmistakable, but its clumsier swipes missed the fish, earning a playful nudge from a sibling. Ember watched, her tail still, her eyes flicking between her cubs and the forest beyond. Elijah's camera rose instinctively, the shutter whispering as he captured the scene. The cub's awkward pounces, Ember's fluid grace. It was a dance of survival, raw and beautiful. He lowered the camera, his heart swelling. Ruth would have sat here for hours, sketching the cubs in her notebook, her laughter mingling with the stream's song. But the joy was fleeting. A glint of metal caught his eye, half buried in the mud near the bank. A trap, its rusted jaws open like a predator's maw. Caleb's work, no doubt. Elijah's blood ran cold. If Ember or her cubs had strayed a few feet, this moment would have been blood and screams. He knelt, examining the trap without touching it. Its teeth were cruel, designed to maim. He'd seen traps like this in his photography travels, relics of a time when men saw the wild as an enemy. Caleb, with his failing farm and bitter heart, clung to that mindset. Elijah's jaw tightened. He couldn't leave it here, not with the cubs so close. Using a stick, he sprang the trap, its snap echoing like a gunshot. The cubs froze, and Ember's head whipped toward him, her eyes narrowing. For a moment, their gazes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. Then she called her cubs, leading them back into the forest's embrace. Elijah stood, his hands shaking. The trap was disarmed, but others were out there. He needed help, someone who knew the land and its people. Agnes's face came to mind, her silver hair and bluegrass hum a beacon in Boone's tight-knit community. She'd mentioned a petition at the community hall, a chance to curb Caleb's recklessness, but it meant stepping into Boone, facing eyes that saw him as an outsider, a city man playing at mountain life. The thought churned his stomach, but Sparrow's frail frame, Ember's vigilance, demanded more than solitude. As he trudged back to the cabin, a familiar figure appeared on the path. Agnes, her basket now filled with herbs, waved, her smile softening the morning's chill. "Thought I'd check on you after that cub," she said, her eyes scanning the clearing. Elijah recounted the stream, the trap, his voice low with urgency. Agnes's face darkened. "Caleb's traps are a menace, but he's got friends who think like him. Farmers, mostly, scared of losing stock." She paused, studying him. "You found that trap because you were watching those bobcats. They're leading you somewhere, Elijah, just like Ruth led you here." Her words struck deep, stirring the locket's weight against his chest. Agnes handed him a sprig of sage, its scent grounding him. "Come to the hall tomorrow," she said. "Bring those photos." "Folks need to see what's at stake." Elijah nodded, though doubt lingered. He wasn't Ruth, with her easy warmth and fearless heart. But as he watched Agnes disappear down the path, her hum blending with the stream's song, he felt a spark of resolve. The bobcats had chosen his doorstep, and he couldn't turn away. Back inside, Elijah set his camera on the table, the trap's snap still ringing in his ears. He'd go to Boone, face Caleb's allies, for Sparrow, for Ember, for Ruth. But first, he'd check the stream again, follow their tracks. The mountains were alive with secrets, and the bobcats were only the beginning. As he laced his boots, the clearing lay quiet, but he knew they'd return, hungry, bold, and drawing him deeper into their world. The Boone Community Hall glowed under strings of Edison bulbs, their warm light spilling onto the worn wooden floor as the twang of bluegrass filled the air. Fiddle and banjo wove a lively reel, mingling with the scent of apple cider and fresh-baked cornbread. Elijah Harper stood at the edge of the crowd, his camera strap cutting into his shoulder, Ruth's locket a steady weight against his chest. The Blue Ridge Mountains loomed beyond the hall's windows, their shadowed peaks a reminder of the bobcat family, Ember and her cubs, especially Sparrow with its star-shaped spot, whose fate hung in the balance. Tonight, he'd face Boone's divided heart, stirred by Caleb Holt's traps and Agnes Weaver's call for change. Elijah's palms were clammy as he scanned the room. Farmers in flannel mingled with shopkeepers, their faces weathered by mountain life. Agnes, her silver hair braided, moved through the crowd, her smile a beacon. She'd insisted he bring his photos, proof of the bobcat's beauty, to sway those swayed by Caleb's talk of livestock losses. But Elijah felt like an outsider, his years in Asheville marking him as a city man despite his homestead. The memory of Sparrow's frail frame, trembling on his porch, steeled him. Ruth would have stood here, fearless, her voice clear. He owed her, and the bobcats, this much. The music paused, and Agnes climbed onto the small stage, her presence commanding. "Folks, we're here to talk about our mountains," she began, her voice warm but firm. "The wilds part of Boone, same as our farms and families. But traps, illegal ones, are hurting more than they help." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others crossing their arms. Caleb Holt leaned against a back wall, his weathered face hard, eyes glinting with defiance. His allies, a cluster of farmers, whispered among themselves, their distrust palpable. Elijah's throat tightened. He'd photographed predators across the Blue Ridge, wolves, bears, but none had unnerved him like Caleb's stare. Agnes gestured to him, and he stepped forward, his boots heavy on the creaking floor. He plugged his camera into a projector, its hum loud in the sudden quiet. The first image flickered onto the wall. Ember, her amber eyes fierce, guarding her cubs. Gasps rose, followed by soft chatter. Sparrow's star-shaped spot drew eyes, its playful pounce frozen in mid-air. "These bobcats came to my land," Elijah said, his voice unsteady at first. "They're not pests. They're starving, pushed by winter. Traps'll kill 'em, not protect us." A woman in a quilted vest raised her hand. "They take chickens, though. My coop's been hit twice." Nods followed, and Caleb stepped forward, his voice gravelly. "Harper's new here, playing at Mountain Life. Bobcats don't care about your pretty pictures. They're predators, same as coyotes. My traps keep my land safe." His allies clapped, their support a low rumble. Elijah's chest burned. He'd expected resistance, but Caleb's words cut, painting him as an outsider. Before he could respond, a new voice cut through. Dr. Lena Brooks, a young veterinarian with sharp eyes and a braid down her back, stood. "Bobcats control rodents, not chickens," she said, her tone precise. "Lose them, and you'll have bigger problems. Rats, disease. Traps don't just kill bobcats, they maim pets, wildlife, even kids if they're not careful." Her words landed hard, and Elijah caught a flicker of pain in her eyes, a story untold. The crowd shifted, some leaning forward, others glancing at Caleb. Agnes seized the moment, strumming her guitar to a soft bluegrass tune. "Let's remember who we are," she sang, her voice weaving a spell. "Boone's a place of balance, not blood." The music softened the room, easing furrowed brows. Elijah projected another photo. Sparrow batting a leaf, its innocence undeniable. A grey-haired woman in the front row dabbed her eyes, whispering, "Looks like my old cat." The mood tilted, but Caleb's scowl held firm, his allies unmoved. As the meeting wound down, Elijah packed his camera, his heart a mix of hope and dread. Lena approached, her expression earnest. "Your photos made a difference," she said. "I've seen traps kill. My childhood dog got caught in one. Never forgot it." Her voice wavered, and Elijah nodded, understanding her pain. "We need a sanctuary," she added. "A place for wildlife to recover, not die." Her dream sparked something in him, a flicker of Ruth's vision for the wild. Agnes joined them, her basket now empty of cornbread. "You did good, Elijah," she said, but her eyes darted to the door. "Caleb's not done." "Watch your land!" The warning chilled him, but before he could reply, a faint mew echoed from outside. Elijah's pulse quickened. He pushed through the crowd, Lena and Agnes behind him, and stepped into the chilly night. There, on the hall's steps, sat Sparrow, alone, its spotted fur ruffled by the wind. Its star-shaped spot gleamed under the moon, but its eyes were wide, frantic. Ember and the other cubs were nowhere in sight. Elijah knelt, his breath shallow. "Where's your mama, little one?" he whispered, fear coiling in his gut. Lena crouched beside him, her hands steady. "She's too young to be alone," she said, scanning the dark. "Something's wrong." Agnes gripped Elijah's shoulder, her voice low. "Caleb's traps, or worse." "We need to find them." The crowd spilled out, some offering help, others muttering about omens. Elijah's mind raced. Sparrow's trust had brought it here, but at what cost? He scooped the cub into his jacket, its warmth a fragile anchor, and vowed to find Ember, before Caleb did. The forest near Caleb Holt's land was a labyrinth of shadow and frost, the Blue Ridge Mountains swallowing the last light of day. Elijah Harper trudged through the underbrush, Sparrow nestled inside his jacket, its faint mews a heartbeat against his chest. Lena Brooks led the way, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, her veterinarian's kit slung over her shoulder. Agnes Weaver followed, her silver braid catching the moon's glow, her bluegrass hum replaced by a tense silence. The Bobcat cub's solo appearance at the Boone Community Hall had sparked a desperate mission. Find Ember and her missing cubs before Caleb's traps, or worse, claimed them. Elijah's boots sank into the damp earth, each step heavy with dread. Sparrow's star-shaped spot, visible through his jacket's gap, was a reminder of the family's vulnerability. The hall's debate replayed in his mind. Caleb's defiance, Lena's plea, Agnes's song. His photos had swayed some, but Caleb's allies saw bobcats as threats, not treasures. Ruth's locket, tucked beneath his flannel, pulsed with her words. Kindness is a risk worth taking. But kindness had led him here, into a forest thick with danger, where every snap of a twig could be a trap or a hunter's step. Lena paused, her flashlight sweeping the ground. "Tracks," she whispered, pointing to faint paw prints in the mud. They were small, likely the cubs, but a larger set, Ember's, veered sharply, marred by a streak of blood. Elijah's stomach churned. "She's hurt," Lena said, her voice steady but tight. She'd shared her story at the hall, her childhood dog's death in a trap fueling her resolve. Now her eyes burned with purpose, scanning for signs of Ember. Agnes knelt, touching the bloodied print. "Not far," she said, "but Caleb's land starts here." "We're trespassing." The word hung heavy. Caleb's farm, a patchwork of failing fields, was a fortress of resentment. His traps, illegal but unchecked, were his retaliation against a world that had taken his livelihood. Elijah clutched Sparrow tighter, its warmth grounding him. "We can't wait," he said, his voice low. "Ember's out there bleeding." Lena nodded, leading them deeper, her flashlight catching glints of frost on pine needles. The forest was silent, save for the distant hoot of an owl, its call a warning in the dark. They followed the tracks to a clearing where a rusted snare lay twisted in the roots of an oak. Ember crouched beside it, her left leg bloodied, her amber eyes wild with pain. The other cubs huddled behind her, their spotted coats trembling. Elijah's heart sank. The trap had caught her, its teeth cruel, but not fatal, yet Ember growled, low and guttural, her body coiled to protect her litter. Sparrow squirmed, mewing, and Elijah set it down, letting it scamper to its mother. Ember's growl softened, her eyes flicking to Elijah, a flicker of recognition in their depths. Lena moved slowly, her voice calm. "Easy, girl. We're here to help." She opened her kit, pulling out bandages and antiseptic. Elijah marveled at her steadiness, her hands unflinching despite Ember's bared teeth. "Hold the light," she told him, and he obeyed, his beam steady on the wound. The trap had torn flesh but missed bone, a small mercy. Lena worked quickly, cleaning the gash and wrapping it, her touch gentle yet precise. Ember flinched but didn't strike, her trust a fragile thread woven by Sparrow's presence. Agnes kept watch, her eyes scanning the trees. "Caleb's not far," she whispered. "His truck was at the hall earlier." Elijah's pulse quickened. If Caleb found them here, on his land, with his trap exposed, there'd be hell to pay. He thought of the hall, the crowd's division, some moved by his photos, others loyal to Caleb's fears. Saving Ember was more than freeing her. It was a stand against a mindset that saw the wild as an enemy. As Lena finished, Ember rose, testing her leg. She chuffed, calling her cubs, who gathered around her, Sparrow nuzzling her side. Elijah's chest ached with relief, but the forest felt alive with threat. Lena packed her kit, her face pale. "She'll heal, but she can't stay here. Caleb's traps are everywhere." Elijah nodded, his mind racing. His cabin was no sanctuary. Feeding the bobcats had already drawn them too close, but leaving them to Caleb's mercy was unthinkable. Agnes broke the silence. "My nephew's got a shed we can fix up," she said. "Temporary, till Ember's strong. But we need to move now." Her voice was firm, her years in Boone giving her a map of its hidden corners. Elijah hesitated, the weight of Ruth's locket grounding him. A shed was a risk, tethering the bobcats to human hands, but winter was closing in, and Ember's injury left her vulnerable. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady for the first time that night. They retraced their steps, Ember limping behind, her cubs in tow. Sparrow stayed close, its star-shaped spot a beacon in the dark. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the owl's call gone silent. As they reached Elijah's homestead, Agnes's nephew, a quiet man named Tom, was waiting with a truck. "Heard about the haul," he said, glancing at Ember. "I'll help." His offer, simple but sincere, eased Elijah's fear. Boone wasn't all Caleb's allies. There were those, like Agnes and Lena, who saw the wild as kin. They loaded supplies, wood, tarps, blankets, into the truck, planning a makeshift pen. Elijah's cabin loomed in the moonlight, its cedar walls a haven he'd built for solitude. Now it was a crossroads, where human and wild met. He looked at Ember, her amber eyes meeting his, and felt Ruth's presence, her dream alive in this moment. But Caleb's shadow lingered, his traps a promise of more blood. As they drove toward Agnes's shed, Elijah vowed to protect this family, whatever the cost, knowing the fight for Boone's soul was just beginning. The first snow dusted the Blue Ridge Mountains, cloaking Elijah Harper's homestead in a quiet shimmer as dawn broke. The air was sharp, biting at his knuckles as he hammered cedar planks into place, building a sheltered pen for Ember and her bobcat cubs. Sparrow, with its star-shaped spot, darted through the flakes, leading its siblings in a playful chase, their spotted coats blending with the frost. Lena Brooks knelt nearby, securing a tarp to shield the pen from the wind, her veterinarian's hands steady despite the cold. Agnes Weaver's warning about Caleb Holt's traps and his lingering resentment hung over them, a shadow darker than the gathering clouds. Ruth's locket, warm against Elijah's chest, pulsed with her words. "Kindness is a risk worth taking." But kindness had drawn the bobcats closer, and with it, danger. The pen took shape under the cabin's eaves, a sturdy frame of wood and wire, open enough for Ember to roam, but safe for her healing leg. Her wound, treated by Lena after the trap's bite, was mending, but she moved with a cautious limp, her amber eyes tracking every sound. Elijah paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and watched Sparrow pounce on a snowflake, its clumsy tumble drawing a rare smile. The cub's joy was a fleeting gift, one Ruth would have sketched with her gentle hand. But Agnes's words at the community hall echoed, "Caleb's not done." His traps were still out there, and his allies, stirred by the meeting, saw Elijah's photos as city man meddling. Lena stood, brushing snow from her braid. "They're settling in," she said, nodding at Ember, who crouched near the pen's edge, her cubs wrestling nearby. "But we can't keep them long. Wild things belong free." Her voice held a trace of her childhood loss, a dog killed by a trap, fueling her dream of a wildlife sanctuary. Elijah nodded, his gaze drifting to the forest. Feeding the bobcats had been his first step, then freeing Ember from Caleb's snare. Now, this pen was a bridge, holding them until Ember could hunt again, but each step tied him tighter to their fate, a responsibility that both warmed and weighed him. A crunch of boots broke his thoughts. Agnes appeared, her silver hair dusted with snow, a basket of supplies, blankets, apples, and a thermos of coffee in her arms. "Boone's talking about you," she said, setting the basket down. Your photos lit a fire. I've got 20 signatures on the petition to ban illegal traps." Her bluegrass lilt was proud, but her eyes were wary. Caleb's riled up, though. "Heard him at the feed store saying you're stirring trouble." She glanced at the pen, where Sparrow batted a stick. "He sees these cubs as proof he's right." Elijah's stomach knotted. Caleb's face at the hall, hard, unyielding, flashed in his mind. The hunter's failing farm had bred a bitterness that saw predators as enemies, not neighbors. "He can't touch them here," Elijah said, his voice firm but uncertain. Agnes raised an eyebrow. "He's not one for rules, and his friends are itching for a fight." She poured coffee, handing him a cup. "I'm hosting a bluegrass night tomorrow. Come, bring Lena. Show folks you're one of us, not just passing through." The invitation stirred unease. Elijah had kept to himself since moving to the Blue Ridge, his grief for Ruth a wall against Boone's bustle. But Sparrow's mew, soft and insistent, pulled his gaze. The cub stood at the pen's edge, its star-shaped spot gleaming as if urging him forward. "I'll come," he said, the words heavy. Agnes smiled, but her hand lingered on his arm. "Good, but watch your back." Caleb's pride's a dangerous thing. As Agnes left, Lena checked Ember's leg, her touch gentle. "She's stronger," she said, but her brow furrowed. "We need a plan, if Caleb comes sniffing." Elijah nodded, hammering the final nail into the pen. The cubs tumbled inside, Sparrow leading a mock hunt, their growls a chorus of life. He thought of Ruth, her sketches of wild things, and felt her dream alive in this act. But Caleb's threat loomed, a storm waiting to break. The day passed in quiet labor, the pen finished by dusk. Elijah scattered fish scraps inside, watching Ember guide her cubs to eat. Sparrow, bold as ever, stole a piece from a sibling, earning a playful swat. Lena laughed, a rare sound, and Elijah caught a spark in her eyes. Hope, maybe, for her sanctuary. As they cleaned up, a low rumble echoed from the path. Headlights pierced the snow, and Caleb's truck rolled into view. Elijah's heart raced. He stepped in front of the pen, Lena at his side, as Caleb climbed out, his face a mask of anger. "Harper," Caleb growled, his breath clouding in the cold. "You're hiding vermin now," he gestured to the pen, where Ember's eyes glowed. "Those cats'll ruin what's left of my land." His voice was raw, laced with the pain of his farm's collapse. Elijah stood tall, though fear coiled in his gut. "They're not yours to kill," he said. "They're part of these mountains, same as you." Caleb's jaw tightened, his hand twitching toward his belt. Lena stepped forward, her voice calm but steel-edged. "You trap again, Caleb, and the whole town'll know. We've got proof." Her words hung, a challenge. Caleb's eyes flicked to her, then back to Elijah. For a moment, silence held them, the snow falling soft and heavy. Then Caleb spat into the frost. "You'll regret this," he said, climbing back into his truck. The engine roared, and he vanished into the night, leaving a chill deeper than the cold. Elijah exhaled, his hands shaking. Lena touched his arm, her gaze steady. "He's scared," she said. "But so are we." Sparrow mewed, pressing against the pen's wire, and Elijah felt Ruth's locket warm his skin. The fight was far from over, but this pen, this moment, was a stand. Tomorrow, at Agnes's bluegrass night, he'd face Boone again, for Ember, for Sparrow, for the wild Ruth loved. As the snow thickened, he knew a storm was coming, one that would test them all. The blizzard descended on the Blue Ridge Mountains like a living thing, its howl drowning the world in white fury. Elijah Harper stumbled through the snow, his flashlight's beam swallowed by the storm. Lena Brooks fought beside him, her scarf whipping in the gale, her veterinarian's kit strapped tight. Agnes Weaver trailed, her silver braid frosted, her bluegrass hum lost to the wind's roar. The pen they'd built for Ember and her bobcat cubs lay in ruins, its cedar planks shattered by the storm's wrath. Sparrow's star-shaped spot had led them here, to a desperate search for the scattered family, with Caleb Holt's threat a shadow in the chaos. Elijah's boots sank into drifts, his breath ragged. The pen's collapse had woken him at midnight, the cubs' panicked mews cutting through the storm. Ember's absence chilled him more than the cold. Her wounded leg, still healing, made her vulnerable. Ruth's locket bounced against his chest, its weight a tether to her dream of wild places. But that dream felt fragile now, with Caleb's words, "You'll regret this," ringing in his ears. The hunter's truck had lingered near the homestead yesterday, a warning of worse to come. Lena shouted over the wind, pointing to tracks in the snow. "Sparrows!" she called, her flashlight catching the cub's small prints marked by its star-shaped spot. The tracks veered toward a rocky ridge where caves pocked the mountainside. Elijah followed, his heart pounding. Sparrow had been bold from the start, its trust in him a spark that had drawn its family to his door. If it was leading them now, Ember couldn't be far. But the storm was merciless, and Caleb's traps, or his rifle, could be closer. Agnes gripped Elijah's arm, her eyes scanning the dark. "Caleb knows these ridges," she said, her voice barely audible. "He hunts here, storm or not." Her fear mirrored Elijah's. At the bluegrass night, Caleb's allies had glared, their loyalty to his cause unmoved by Agnes's petition or Elijah's photos. Boone was split. Some saw the Bobcats as kin, others as threats. If Caleb found Ember first, blood would stain the snow. The tracks led to a cave, its mouth a black gash in the ridge. Lena's light swept inside, revealing Ember, her amber eyes glowing as she sheltered her cubs. Sparrow pressed against her, its spotted fur wet but defiant. The other cubs huddled close, their mews faint against the storm's roar. Ember's leg was bandaged, but fresh blood seeped through, her strength waning. Elijah's relief crashed against fear. She couldn't run, not like this. Lena knelt, her kit open, her hands steady despite the cold. "She's fighting," she said, checking the wound. "But we need to get them warm." Before Elijah could respond, a crunch of snow sounded outside. Caleb Holt emerged, his rifle slung low, his face carved with anger. "Found your cats," he growled, his breath clouding. "They're on my land now." His eyes flicked to Ember, then to Elijah, a challenge raw with his farm's ruin. Elijah stepped forward, shielding the cave. "They're not yours to take," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Lena rose, her gaze locked on Caleb. "You shoot, and Boone'll turn on you," she said. "We've got witnesses." Agnes moved beside them, her voice soft but piercing. "Caleb, my sister died saving a horse from a storm like this," she said, her words cutting through the wind. "She'd say there's no pride in killing what's already hurting." Her story, simple but heavy, hung in the air. Caleb's grip on the rifle faltered, his eyes clouding. Elijah saw it then, the weight of Caleb's losses, his farm, his hope, twisted into this moment. "You don't get it," Caleb muttered, but his voice cracked, raw with guilt. The storm howled, and Sparrow mewed, its star-shaped spot a beacon in the cave's gloom. Caleb's shoulders sagged, the rifle lowering. "Keep 'em off my land," he said, turning back into the snow. His retreat felt like a truce, fragile as the flakes falling around them. Elijah exhaled, his hands trembling. Lena worked quickly, rebandaging Ember's leg, her touch a lifeline. Agnes gathered the cubs, wrapping them in her scarf, her eyes wet with relief. They carried the bobcats back to the homestead, the storm easing as dawn hinted grey on the horizon. The pen could be rebuilt, but Caleb's shadow lingered. Elijah thought of Ruth, her dream of wild hearts, and felt it pulse in Sparrow's warmth against him. Lena's sanctuary, Agnes's petition, the fight for Boone's soul was growing, and Elijah was no longer alone. But Caleb's rifle, his pain, promised more battles. As they reached the cabin, Elijah vowed to protect this family, knowing the storm had only paused, not passed. The snow had settled over the Blue Ridge Mountains, blanketing Elijah Harper's homestead in a quiet that felt both peaceful and precarious. Dawn's light filtered through the pines, casting long shadows across the rebuilt pen where Ember and her bobcat cubs rested. Sparrow, with its star-shaped spot, tumbled over a sibling, its playful energy a spark against the morning's chill. Elijah stood at his cabin's window, coffee steaming in his hands, Ruth's locket warm against his chest. The storm had tested them, Ember's rescue from the cave, Caleb Holt's grudging retreat, but Boone's divide lingered, a fault line widened by traps and fear. Tonight, at the community hall, he'd face it again. Inside the hall, the air buzzed with tension and the faint strum of a banjo. Edison bulbs swayed, their glow softening the crowd's hard edges, farmers, shopkeepers and retirees, their faces a map of Boone's history. Elijah adjusted his camera, its weight grounding him as he prepared to show new photos. Ember's healing leg, Sparrow's bold gaze. Lena Brooks stood beside him, her veterinarian's braid neat, her eyes sharp with purpose. Agnes Weaver moved through the room, her silver hair catching the light, her petition now thick with signatures. Caleb's rifle, lowered in the storm, hadn't erased his influence. His allies whispered in corners, their distrust a low hum. Agnes took the stage, her voice clear. "We've got proof," she said, holding up a rusted trap, its jaws glinting. "Caleb's been setting these illegally, endangering our wildlife." Murmurs rose, some angry, others uneasy. Elijah stepped forward, his heart pounding, and projected his images onto the wall. Ember's amber eyes filled the room, her cubs a tumble of spotted fur. "These bobcats aren't threats," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "They're part of Boone, same as us. Traps don't just kill them, they break the balance we all need." A grizzled farmer stood, his voice rough. "Balance don't pay for lost sheep." Nods followed, and Elijah's chest tightened. Caleb, leaning against a pillar, crossed his arms, his face unreadable. Before Elijah could respond, Lena spoke, her tone precise. "Bobcats eat rodents, not sheep. Traps kill more pets than predators. My dog learned that the hard way." Her pain, raw and real, silenced the room. Elijah caught her glance, grateful for her fire, a spark Ruth would have loved. Agnes unslung her guitar, strumming a bluegrass chord. "Let's talk solutions," she said, her song weaving tales of Boone's wild heart, deer, owls, and now bobcats. The crowd softened, some tapping their feet, others wiping eyes. Elijah showed Sparrow's latest photo, its star-shaped spot gleaming as it leapt for a stick. A woman in a shawl whispered, "Like a little angel." The mood shifted, and Agnes held up the petition. "This bans illegal traps," she said. "Sign it, and we'll take it to rally." The hall erupted, cheers from some, grumbles from others. A town official, swayed by the photos, promised to suspend Caleb's hunting license pending investigation. Caleb's allies shouted, but the tide had turned. Elijah exhaled, his shoulders easing. Lena leaned close. "We did it," she said, her smile tentative. "But Caleb won't let this go quietly." Her words echoed Agnes's warning, and Elijah nodded, the locket heavy with Ruth's dream. As the meeting ended, Agnes gathered signatures, her bluegrass night planned for tomorrow to celebrate. Elijah packed his camera, Lena at his side, when a commotion drew their eyes outside. Sparrow, bold as ever, had slipped from the pen and wandered to the hall's steps, its spotted fur ruffled by the wind. Elijah knelt, scooping it up, its warmth a reminder of their fragile bond. "Your trouble," he murmured, but his smile faded at the sight of Caleb's truck idling nearby, its headlights cutting the dark. Back at the homestead, Elijah and Lena checked the pen. Ember lounged inside, her legs stronger, her cubs sprawled in a pile. Sparrow wriggled free, joining its siblings, its star-shaped spot a beacon. Lena sat on a stump, her face lit by the lantern. "I got a call today," she said, her voice soft. "Funding for a wildlife sanctuary, enough to start building. I want you in on it, Elijah. Your photos could make it real." Her dream, born from loss, mirrored Ruth's, and Elijah felt a pull, a purpose beyond his grief. He touched the locket, its wildflower etching rough under his thumb. "I'm in," he said, the words a vow. Lena's eyes lit up, but Agnes's arrival broke the moment. "Caleb's on community service," she said, her basket full of cornbread. "Judge's orders, but his friends are spreading rumors, saying you're out to ruin them." Her warning landed hard, and Elijah glanced at Ember, her amber eyes steady. The Bobcats were thriving, but their time here was short. Winter was deepening, and Caleb's pride was a spark waiting to ignite. As Agnes left, Elijah watched the cubs play, Sparrow leading a mock hunt. Boone was changing, Lena's sanctuary, Agnes's petition, but Caleb's shadow loomed. Tomorrow's bluegrass night would test their fragile victory. Elijah vowed to stand firm, for Ember, for Sparrow, for the wild Ruth loved. The mountains held their breath, and he knew the fight wasn't over. The Blue Ridge Mountains glowed under a January moon, their snow-draped peaks a silent witness to Elijah Harper's homestead. Ember and her bobcat cubs were changing, their hunts stretching farther into the forest, their visits to the pen less frequent. Sparrow, with its star-shaped spot, still led the pack, its bold leaps a contrast to its growing strength. Elijah stood in the clearing, his camera heavy around his neck, Ruth's locket a quiet pulse against his heart. The community hall's victory, Caleb's hunting ban, Agnes's petition, had shifted Boone, but the Bobcat's independence signaled a farewell, one that stirred both pride and ache. Dawn broke, and Elijah checked the pen, now more a rest stop than a home. Ember lounged inside, her leg heeled, her amber eyes tracking the horizon. The cubs wrestled nearby, their spotted coats thicker, their play edging toward hunting practice. Sparrow pounced on a pine cone, its star-shaped spot gleaming, and Elijah's camera clicked, capturing the moment. Ruth would have loved this, her sketches alive with such wild joy, but the cubs' strength meant they'd soon leave, a truth that tugged at him like the wind's chill. Lena Brooks arrived, her veterinarian's kit lighter now that Ember was strong. "They're ready," she said, watching Sparrow tumble with a sibling. "Maybe a week. Then they're gone." Her voice held a mix of hope and loss, her sanctuary dream closer since the funding call. Elijah nodded, his throat tight. Feeding Sparrow, freeing Ember, building the pen. Each act had woven him into their lives, healing his grief for Ruth. But letting go was part of the deal, a lesson the mountains taught without mercy. Agnes Weaver's truck rumbled up, her silver hair catching the sun as she stepped out, a flyer for her bluegrass night in hand. "Whole town's coming," she said, her smile warm. "We'll tell the Bobcat's story, make it Boone's own." Her petition had reached Raleigh, drawing conservationists eager to see Elijah's photos, but her eyes flicked to the forest. "Caleb's been quiet, working his service. Still, I don't trust quiet." Elijah's jaw tightened. Caleb's retreat in the storm, his ban, hadn't erased his pride, or his allies' grumbles. They sat by the pen, sharing Agnes's coffee, the cubs' play a backdrop. Lena spoke of her sanctuary, a haven for injured wildlife, its groundbreaking set for spring. "It's what my dog deserved," she said, her childhood loss a shadow in her eyes. "A chance to heal, not die." Elijah felt Ruth's locket warm his skin, her dream aligning with Lena's. "Your photos could fund it," Lena added, her gaze earnest. "Show the world what we're saving." The idea stirred him, a purpose beyond his lens, but Sparrow's mew broke his thoughts, its bold scamper a reminder of time's pull. As dusk fell, Boone's community hall pulsed with bluegrass, fiddles and guitars weaving a tapestry of sound. Agnes took the stage, her silver braid gleaming, her voice a storyteller's spell. "These mountains hold us," she began, "and tonight we honor their wild heart." She wove the bobcat's tale, Sparrow's cry, Ember's courage, into Boone's lore, her words painting Elijah's photos on the crowd's minds. The hall, packed with townsfolk, leaned in, their faces soft with wonder. Elijah stood at the back, Lena beside him, his camera still, his heart full. A stir at the door drew his eyes. Caleb Holt entered, his face weathered but calm, a carved wooden bobcat in his hands. The crowd hushed as he approached Agnes, offering the statue. "For the story," he said, his voice low, rough with something like regret. Murmurs followed, surprise, approval, suspicion. Elijah's breath caught. Caleb's service, his silence, had hinted at change, but this felt deeper, a crack in his armor. Agnes accepted the carving, her smile cautious but kind. "Boone's big enough for all of us," she said, placing it beside her guitar. The music swelled, and Elijah shared new photos, Sparrow's leap, Ember's healed stride. The crowd clapped, some rising, their cheers a tide against Caleb's allies, who sat quiet, outnumbered. Lena squeezed Elijah's arm, her eyes bright. "This is it," she whispered. The sanctuary's real now. Her dream, once distant, was taking root, and Elijah felt Ruth's presence, her wildflower locket a silent cheer. But Caleb's gesture, sincere or not, left a question. What drove him now? Back at the homestead, Elijah sat by the pen, the moon high. Ember led her cubs on a brief hunt, returning to rest, Sparrow sprawling beside her. Their time here was ending, their wildness calling. Elijah touched the locket, sharing it with Lena as she joined him. "Ruth wanted this," he said, his voice thick. "A world where wild things thrive." Lena nodded, her hand brushing his. "We'll make it," she said, her sanctuary a promise they'd build together. Agnes arrived, her flyer now a poster for the groundbreaking. "Caleb's helping," she said, her tone wary. "Says he wants to fix things." "Time'll tell." Her words lingered, a reminder of Boone's fragile unity. Sparrow stirred, its star-shaped spot catching the moonlight, and Elijah felt the bobcats pull, their farewell near. Tomorrow he'd watch them hunt, capturing their final days. The mountains whispered of change, Lena's sanctuary, Caleb's shift, Boone's heart, and Elijah knew he'd carry this story, for Ruth, for the wild, into whatever came next. The Blue Ridge Mountains shimmered under a starlit sky, their snow-draped peaks cradling Elijah Harper's homestead in a hush broken only by the soft crunch of frost. Dawn was near, painting the horizon with a faint blush, and the air carried the sharp bite of late January. Elijah stood by the rebuilt pen, his breath clouding, Ruth's locket a steady pulse against his chest. Ember and her bobcat cubs had grown restless, their hunts stretching deep into the forest, their visits fleeting. Sparrow, with its star-shaped spot, was bolder than ever, its eyes now sharp with a wildness that tugged at Elijah's heart. Tonight, they'd come one last time, a farewell he'd both dreaded and honored. The pen stood empty, its cedar planks worn but sturdy, a temporary haven for Ember's healing leg. Elijah's camera hung at his side, untouched, as he scanned the clearing. The bobcat's independence had grown since the storm, since Caleb Holt's grudging retreat and Boone's shifting tides. Agnes Weaver's bluegrass night, Caleb's carved offering, had woven the bobcats into the town's soul, but their departure was a truth the mountains demanded. Ruth's dream, of wild things free, lived in this moment, yet letting go felt like losing her again. A rustle broke the silence, and Ember emerged, her muscular frame a shadow against the snow. Her amber eyes met Elijah's, steady and knowing, her healed leg strong. The cubs followed, 5 spotted forms tumbling in her wake, Sparrow leading with a playful leap. They were nearly her size now, their kittenish clumsiness replaced by a hunter's grace. Sparrow darted to the pen, its star-shaped spot catching the starlight, and pressed a paw to the wire, its gaze locking with Elijah's. The gesture, fleeting but deliberate, pierced him. A goodbye, clear as any words. Lena Brooks stepped from the cabin, her veterinarian's braid tucked under a scarf, her breath a soft cloud. She'd spent the night planning her sanctuary's groundbreaking, her dream now funded and real. "They're ready," she whispered, her eyes on Sparrow, her voice thick with pride and loss. Elijah nodded, his throat tight. Feeding Sparrow, freeing Ember, building this pen. Each act had bound him to them, healing the grief that had driven him to these mountains. But freedom was their right, not his to hold. Agnes Weaver arrived, her silver hair glowing in the dawn, her basket empty save for a thermos of coffee. She'd come to witness her bluegrass tales of the bobcats now Boone's law. "They chose you," she said, her voice soft. "That's a gift, Elijah, even if it hurts." Her words, heavy with her own losses, settled in him. She stood beside Lena, the 3 of them a silent guard as Ember chuffed, calling her cubs. They gathered, Sparrow lingering, its paw still pressed to the wire, its eyes a mirror of the stars. Elijah's chest ached, tears pricking as he knelt, inches from Sparrow. "Go on, little one," he murmured, his voice breaking. The cub tilted its head, then bounded to its mother, its star-shaped spot fading into the pack. Ember led them toward the forest, her stride sure, her cubs a ripple of motion. At the tree line, she paused, turning back, her amber eyes holding Elijah's for a heartbeat, a thank you, a farewell. Then they melted into the dark, the snow swallowing their tracks, leaving the clearing empty. Lena's hand found Elijah's, her touch warm. "You gave them a chance," she said, her own eyes wet. Agnes poured coffee, her hum a faint bluegrass echo, grounding them. Elijah clutched Ruth's locket, its wildflower etching rough under his thumb. This was what she'd wanted, a world where wild hearts thrived, untouched by traps or fear. But the ache of their absence was raw, a wound he'd carry alongside his healing. As dawn broke, Elijah uploaded his photos to his website. Shots of Sparrow's leap, Ember's strength. The images, paired with a note about Boone's fight, spread fast, sparking emails from conservationists worldwide. Lena's sanctuary gained donors, its groundbreaking set for spring. Agnes's petition, now law in Raleigh, banned illegal traps, a victory born of their stand. But Caleb's shadow lingered. His service, his carving, hinted at change, but his pride was a spark unquenched. The day unfolded in quiet purpose. Elijah and Lena planned the sanctuary, sketching a haven for injured wildlife. Agnes prepared for her bluegrass night, a celebration of Boone's new path. By noon, a truck rumbled up. Caleb, his face weathered but calm, a wooden sign in his hands. "For the sanctuary," he said, his voice rough. "Name it for your wife." The sign read, "Ruth's Haven," its carved wildflowers a mirror of the locket. Elijah's breath caught, gratitude warring with caution. Caleb's gesture was real, but his eyes held a flicker of old pain. Agnes took the sign, her smile wary. "Boone's healing," she said, "but it's slow work." Caleb nodded, climbing back into his truck, his silence heavy. Elijah watched him go, the locket warm against his skin. Sparrow's paw print, etched in his memory, urged him forward, to Lena's dream, Agnes's fight, a town remade. The Bobcats were gone, but their story lived, a flame he'd carry into Boone's next chapter, whatever it held. Spring's first breath stirred the Blue Ridge Mountains, dogwoods blooming in bursts of white as Elijah Harper's homestead hummed with new life. The pen was gone, its cedar planks repurposed for Lena Brooks's wildlife sanctuary, its groundbreaking a month past. Elijah stood in his clearing, camera in hand, Ruth's locket glinting in the morning sun. Ember and her cubs were a memory now, their farewell under January's stars a turning point. Sparrow's star-shaped spot lingered in his mind, a symbol of the wild that had healed him. Boone was changing. Lena's sanctuary, Agnes Weaver's youth program, even Caleb Holt's quiet redemption, and Elijah was no longer the outsider he'd been. Lena's sanctuary, Ruth's haven, sprawled across a meadow near Boone, its pens and clinics a haven for injured foxes, owls, and deer. Elijah was her partner, his photos funding its growth, drawing visitors from Raleigh to Richmond. Today, he'd lead his first workshop, teaching ethical wildlife photography, patience, respect, not pursuit. His camera, once a shield for his grief, was now a bridge connecting Boone to the world. The sanctuary's sign, Caleb's carved gift, stood at the gate, its wildflowers a nod to Ruth's dream. Elijah drove to the sanctuary, the Blue Ridge unfolding in green waves. Lena greeted him, her braid loose, her smile bright. "We've got 50 sign-ups," she said, her veterinarian's kit swapped for a clipboard. "Your photos did this." Her dream, born from a childhood dog's loss, was thriving, and Elijah felt Ruth's presence in every pen, every healed creature. They'd grown close since January, their late-night talks weaving a bond beyond the Bobcats. Her touch, light but sure, sparked hope he hadn't dared feel since Ruth's death. Agnes arrived, her silver hair crowned with a dogwood bloom, her youth program buzzing with teens eager to learn storytelling. "Boone's kids'll keep the Bobcat's tale alive," she said, her bluegrass hum a backdrop. Her program, funded by the petition's success, blended music and law, teaching respect for the wild. Elijah smiled, remembering her tales at the community hall, how they'd swayed hearts. Agnes was Boone's soul, her wisdom a thread tying past to future. The workshop began, Elijah guiding students through the sanctuary's trails. He spoke of Sparrow's trust, Ember's strength, showing photos that silence chatter. "It's about earning their story," he said, his voice steady, "not taking it." A teen, eyes wide, asked about traps, and Elijah shared Caleb's ban, Agnes's fight. The story resonated, sparking questions, vows to protect the wild. Lena watched, her pride clear, and Elijah felt the locket warm, Ruth's dream alive in these voices. Midday brought a surprise. A bobcat, sleek and spotted, darted across the meadow, its forehead marked with a star-shaped spot. Elijah froze, his heart leaping. Sparrow, or its kin, thriving in the wild. The students gasped, cameras forgotten, their awe a mirror of his own. Lena squeezed his hand, whispering, "They're still with us." The sighting felt like a gift, a sign the bobcat's legacy endured, woven into the sanctuary's heart. Agnes gathered the teens, weaving the sighting into a tale. "That's Boone's spirit," she said, her guitar strumming soft. "Wild and free, but never far." Her program was spreading, inspiring towns beyond the Blue Ridge. Elijah's photos, hung in Raleigh galleries, drew conservationists, their offers piling up, books, films, partnerships. The sanctuary was a model, Boone a beacon, its trap ban now state law. Caleb's service had ended, but he'd stayed, helping build pens, his carpentry a quiet amends. By dusk, Elijah and Lena sat by the sanctuary's gate, the dogwoods glowing under the moon. He hung Ruth's locket on a post, its wildflower etching catching the light, a tribute to her dream fulfilled. "She'd love this," he said, his voice thick. Lena nodded, her hand in his. "We're just starting," she said, her sanctuary a promise of more lives saved, their future, unspoken but clear, stretched ahead, rooted in this place. Agnes joined them, her hum a bluegrass hymn. "Caleb's speaking at your gallery soon," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Says he's proud of Boone." The news settled in Elijah, a final piece clicking into place. The bobcats had changed them all, him, Lena, Agnes, even Caleb, binding them to the wild's pulse. As stars emerged, Elijah looked to the forest, hoping for another glimpse of Sparrow's spot. The mountains whispered of continuity, a legacy he'd carry into Boone's next dawn, a story far from over. The Blue Ridge Mountains bloomed under a spring sky, dogwoods bursting white and pink across Elijah Harper's homestead, their petals drifting like soft promises. Years had passed since Ember and her bobcat cubs had vanished into the forest, Sparrow's star-shaped spot, a fading echo in the twilight. Now, Elijah stood in his clearing, coffee steaming in his hands, Ruth's locket glinting at his neck. The cabin, weathered but warm, held memories of grief and healing, of a winter when the wild had remade him. Today, Boone's legacy, forged by Lena Brooks, Agnes Weaver, and even Caleb Holt, would shine, a final chapter written in starlight and song. Elijah's gaze swept the mountains, their green waves alive with birdsong. Ruth's haven, Lena's wildlife sanctuary, thrived down the road, its pens full of foxes, owls and deer, each life a testament to their fight. Elijah was its co-founder, his photos a global call to protect the wild, his workshops teaching respect over capture. The homestead felt quieter now, the pen long dismantled, but the forest pulsed with possibility. As he sipped his coffee, a shadow moved at the tree line, a bobcat, sleek and spotted, its forehead marked with a star-shaped spot. Elijah's breath caught. Sparrow, or its kin, gazed at him, its eyes a mirror of that first twilight cry, then vanished into the underbrush. The sighting stirred him, a gift from the mountains. He drove to Boone, the town's streets bustling with spring's energy, bluegrass drifting from open windows. Ruth's Haven was hosting a gallery event tonight. Elijah's photos hung beside stories of Boone's transformation. Lena greeted him at the sanctuary, her braid loose, her smile a warmth that had grown into love. "Ready?" she asked, her hand brushing his. He nodded, the locket heavy with Ruth's dream, now theirs. The sanctuary's sign, Caleb's carved Ruth's Haven, its wildflowers etched deep, stood proud, a symbol of their shared path. Agnes Weaver arrived, her silver hair crowned with dogwood blooms, her youth program a wildfire of young voices. Teens swarmed her, their stories of bobcats and bluegrass echoing her lessons. "Boone's theirs now," she said, her hum a hymn of pride. Her program, born from the petition's victory, had spread across the Blue Ridge, teaching kids to honor the wild. Elijah smiled, remembering her tales that had swayed the community hall, binding them to Ember's legacy. Agnes was Boone's heart, her wisdom eternal. The gallery filled as dusk fell, townsfolk mingling with conservationists from Raleigh and beyond. Elijah's photos lined the walls. Sparrow's leap, Ember's amber eyes, the cubs' snowy play, each frame a chapter of their winter. Lena spoke first, her voice clear. "Ruth's Haven is Boone's promise," she said, gesturing to the pens outside. "A place where wild things heal because of you." Applause rose, and Elijah felt her hand squeeze his, their partnership a quiet vow. Agnes took the stage, her guitar strumming soft. "This is for the bobcats," she said, weaving their tale. Sparrow's cry, the storm, Caleb's change into a bluegrass ballad. The crowd leaned in, some dabbing eyes, others tapping feet. Elijah's throat tightened, Ruth's locket warm against his skin. The song was Boone's soul, wild and resilient, a gift Agnes gave freely. Then a stir at the door. Caleb Holt stepped in, his face lined but steady, no longer the hunter of old. He'd helped build the sanctuary, his carpentry a quiet amends, his pride softened by time. Lena nodded to him, and he climbed the stage, his voice rough but sure. "I was wrong," he said, eyes on the crowd. "These mountains aren't mine to tame. They're ours to keep." He turned to Elijah, holding up a new carving, a bobcat with a star-shaped spot. "For Ruth," he said, his gaze meeting Elijah's, a peace hard won. The crowd roared, their cheers a tide of unity. Elijah took the carving, its wood warm, and hung it beside Sparrow's photo, Ruth's locket glinting nearby. The gallery pulsed with life, Lena's dream, Agnes's song, Caleb's change, all woven into Boone's heart. The town's wilderness, protected by their laws, was a global model, its story carried by Elijah's photos, Agnes's teens, Lena's haven. The bobcats thrived, their tracks a whisper in the forest, a legacy beyond traps or fear. As night deepened, Boone gathered outside, bluegrass swelling under the stars. Elijah stood with Lena, her hand in his, Agnes's hymn rising. "To Ruth," he whispered, raising a glass, the locket catching the moonlight. The crowd echoed, their voices a chorus of home. Caleb joined, his nod a silent pledge, his past forgiven in this moment. The mountains watched, dogwoods swaying, and Elijah felt Sparrow's gaze, its star-shaped spot alive in the wild. He returned to the homestead at midnight, the cabin quiet, its door ajar. Sitting by the hearth, coffee cold, he traced the locket's wildflower, Ruth's dream complete. The bobcats had led him here, to Lena, to Boone, to a purpose that outshone his grief. The carving sat on the mantel, Sparrow's spot eternal, a reminder of a winter when the wild had saved them all. Bluegrass drifted from Boone, a hymn of continuity, and Elijah smiled, at peace with the mountain's song, knowing the story lived on. In him, in Boone, in the wild's enduring heart. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.